Heavenly Stories.
After the great flood, when Noah and his family stepped out of the ark, the world felt fresh, quiet, and filled with possibility. The earth had been cleansed, and God had given humanity a chance to start again. Generations passed, and the descendants of Noah multiplied across the land. They spoke the same language, shared the same culture, and worked together with one heart. For a time, it seemed as though unity brought peace and progress. But hidden within the hearts of men was a seed of pride that would soon grow into rebellion. As the people journeyed east, they came to a vast plain in the land of Shinar. The land was rich and flat, perfect for building. There, the people decided to settle. They began to imagine a future where their greatness would stretch to the skies. One man's idea soon became the vision of many: let us make bricks, let us build for ourselves a city, and let us raise a tower whose top will reach the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, so that we will not be scattered across the face of the earth. The proposal seemed noble to them. It was not just about survival anymore, it was about legacy, glory, and control. They wanted to create something that would outlast generations, something that would prove their strength. The brickmakers worked tirelessly, burning clay and forming bricks stronger than stone. Bitumen was used as mortar, binding the structure together. Soon, the city began to rise, and the tower stretched higher and higher. Its shadow fell across the plain, a monument to human ambition. From afar, the tower was a marvel. Travelers and families from distant regions came to witness its construction. Some stood in awe, while others joined in, drawn by the excitement of unity and the promise of greatness. People no longer spoke of God's command to fill the earth, instead, they spoke of their own power. They believed that together, with one voice and one purpose, nothing would be impossible for them. But in their determination to reach the heavens, they began to forget the one who truly ruled them. God watched as the city grew. He saw the tower rising, brick upon brick, and he knew the thoughts of men. He understood that this project was not simply about unity or survival, it was about pride, rebellion, and the desire to replace him. Humanity's dream was no longer about worshipping the Creator but about becoming gods themselves. The tower was a symbol of defiance, a declaration that they could achieve greatness without God. Yet, God was patient. He did not strike them down with fire or flood as he had in the past. Instead, he prepared to teach them a lesson that would echo throughout history, a lesson about pride, limits, and his divine plan. The tower kept climbing higher, and the people of Shinar took pride in every new level that reached the sky. Children laughed as they carried clay to their fathers. Women wove baskets to transport bricks. Men lifted heavy loads upon their shoulders, chanting songs of progress as the walls rose. There was a feeling of unstoppable energy, a belief that together they could accomplish anything. Their hearts swelled with pride at the thought, we are making history. We are touching the heavens. No one dared to question the project. The leaders proclaimed that the tower would be their shield against scattering, their proof of strength. When future generations look to the skies, they will remember us, they said. And indeed, the tower became more than stone and brick. It became their identity, their obsession. But slowly, the people's hearts drifted from gratitude to arrogance. Meals around the fire no longer included prayers to the Creator. Conversations focused on the tower, on human skill and ambition. They said to one another, who needs God when we can rise to the heavens ourselves? Their voices, once lifted in unity to honor their Maker, now echoed with self-glory. From his throne above, God observed their restless striving. He saw how their pride chained them to an illusion of power. He knew that if humanity continued down this path, they would believe they could rule without him. And he also knew the dangers of such unchecked ambition. Pride, once full-grown, brings destruction. So the Lord descended to see the city and the tower that the people were building. Of course, he already knew every detail, every stone placed, every thought in their hearts. But by stepping down into their world, he revealed how small their grand project really was compared to his creation. The tower, though massive to human eyes, was like a child's stack of stones before the Almighty. As he looked upon them, God spoke, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. This is only the beginning of what they will do. If left unchallenged, nothing they propose will be impossible for them. They will believe they can rise without me, and their pride will only deepen." The angels listened, awaiting the Lord's decision. He did not plan another flood, he had promised Noah never to destroy the earth in that way again. Instead, he would use a different strategy, one that would humble humanity while still giving them a chance to fulfill his plan. For God's goal was not destruction, but correction. He desired to remind them of their dependence on him, to bring their focus back to the truth. Then the Lord declared, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." It was a decision both merciful and powerful. By dividing their tongues, God would dismantle their pride, scatter their ambitions, and redirect them toward his greater purpose. The moment had come. The people were about to learn that no tower, no matter how high, could ever replace the authority of the Almighty. The morning began like any other. The workers gathered with baskets of bricks, ropes, and clay. Voices rose in the usual rhythm of construction, shouting instructions and encouragement. But something unexpected happened. When one man called for mortar, his companion looked at him with confusion. The words sounded strange, unfamiliar, like the babbling of a foreign traveler. The man repeated himself, louder this time, but again, no understanding came. Frustration grew on their faces. Nearby, another group tried to coordinate the lifting of a massive stone. Yet when the leader shouted the count, 1, 2, 3, his helpers only stared blankly. They could no longer follow his command, because to them, his words were gibberish. Laughter and irritation spread across the site as more and more workers realized that they could no longer communicate. Their once united voice had been fractured into countless tongues. At first, many thought it was a cruel joke. But as the hours passed, anger replaced confusion. People shouted at each other, gesturing wildly, desperate to explain themselves. But instead of clarity, there was only noise, waves of unfamiliar sounds colliding in chaos. The harmony that had once united them was gone. The tower that symbolized strength now became a monument of disorder. Fathers could not understand their sons, wives struggled to speak to husbands, and leaders could no longer command their people. The very unity they treasured, the foundation of their project, had crumbled in a single day. Arguments broke out, then fights, as groups began separating by the language they could understand. The leaders shouted for calm, but even they could not bridge the gap. "This is the end," some cried. "We can no longer build together." The dream of reaching the heavens collapsed under the weight of misunderstanding. As the sun set over Shinar, the tower stood incomplete, a giant scar on the plain, a reminder of humanity's pride. Families packed their belongings, gathering with those who spoke their tongue. One group headed north, another south, while others traveled east and west. They left the city behind, scattered across the earth, just as God had intended from the beginning. And so the Lord's plan was fulfilled. The people, who had resisted his command to spread out and fill the earth, were now dispersed by divine intervention. Their unity had been powerful, but it had been built on rebellion. God, in his wisdom, ensured that they would no longer unite in pride against him. Instead, he turned their scattering into the first steps toward nations, cultures, and diversity. Though the people of Shinar could not see it then, this scattering was not a curse, it was a correction. Through many languages and nations, God would one day reveal his greater plan, to unite all people, not under pride or human ambition, but under his truth and grace. The city was left behind, abandoned, and the tower was given a name, Babel, meaning confusion. It stood as a warning through the ages, a symbol of what happens when humanity tries to rise without God. Generations later, people still spoke of the unfinished tower that stood in the plain of Shinar. Travelers would pass by its ruins, gazing up at the massive base, the bricks weathered by time and storms. Parents pointed to it when telling their children about the day the world's single language shattered into many. The story of Babel was no longer just about construction, it had become a lesson written into human memory. For those who reflected deeply, the meaning was clear: pride had blinded humanity. They had sought to climb to heaven, not by humility or worship, but by bricks and ambition. The tower was not simply an architectural project, it was a rebellion in stone. Each layer of bricks represented defiance against God's command to spread out and fill the earth. And in His mercy, God intervened, not to destroy, but to redirect. The scattering of nations was not the end of His plan, but a new chapter in it. As centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell. Nations developed their own cultures, traditions, and languages. What began as confusion became the root of diversity. From the frozen north to the deserts of the south, people carved out their homes and identities. Yet no matter where they went, the shadow of Babel lingered in the collective story of humanity. It reminded them that pride separates, but God's plan endures. The people who once dreamed of touching the heavens through stone now struggled with the reality of misunderstanding. Every tribe and tongue carried its own voice, and miscommunication often bred conflict. Wars, rivalries, and divisions became common. And still, deep inside, humanity longed for the unity it had lost. They remembered the days when one voice carried across the earth, but they also remembered the danger of that unity when it was twisted by pride. The prophets of Israel would later point back to the lessons of Babel. They warned kings and nations about arrogance, declaring that human pride always leads to downfall. They reminded the people that God is not impressed by monuments or towers, but by hearts that seek Him. The tower became a symbol across generations of what happens when humanity exalts itself above the Creator. Yet the story was never meant to end with despair. God had a greater plan, one that reached far beyond the ruins of Babel. He would one day bring the nations together again, but not through bricks, stone, or human ambition. This time, unity would come through His Spirit and truth. What humanity had tried to accomplish by its own strength, God Himself would achieve in His perfect timing. The ruins of Babel may have crumbled long ago, but the lessons it carried still echo in modern times. Humanity continues to build its towers, not always of brick and mortar, but of technology, wealth, and power. People reach for the skies with skyscrapers, rockets, and digital empires, hoping to make a name for themselves. Nations compete for greatness, corporations chase dominance, and individuals seek fame that will outlast their lives. In many ways, the story of Babel is not ancient history, it is the story of today. Just like in Shinar, the drive to achieve can inspire creativity and progress. But when ambition turns to pride, the same danger returns. Pride whispers, "We don't need God. We can build our own heaven." This mindset has led to broken relationships, corrupt systems, and nations that crumble under arrogance. The lesson of Babel warns that human strength, no matter how united, cannot replace divine guidance. And yet, there is hope. For while God scattered the people at Babel, He also promised redemption. Centuries after the confusion of tongues, another event would take place in Jerusalem. On the day of Pentecost, people from many nations gathered, each speaking different languages. But when the Spirit of God came upon the followers of Jesus, something remarkable happened. They began to speak in tongues, and every listener heard the message in their own language. Where Babel brought confusion, Pentecost brought clarity. Where pride divided, God's Spirit united. This was the true reversal of Babel, not humanity building up to heaven, but God reaching down to humanity through His grace. The plan that began with scattering would end with gathering, not under pride, but under love and truth. Unity, once broken by arrogance, would be restored in Christ. For modern society, the ruins of Babel still speak. They remind us that greatness without humility is fragile, and ambition without God leads to emptiness. The towers we build today, whether in business, politics, or personal achievement, will crumble if they are not grounded in God's purpose. But when people humble themselves, seek His wisdom, and live in harmony with His plan, true unity and progress can flourish. So the story of Babel is not just about a tower left unfinished. It is about the heart of humanity, torn between pride and humility, rebellion and obedience. It is about God's unshakable plan to guide His creation, even when they wander. And above all, it is a story of hope, that no matter how many languages, nations, or divisions exist, God's plan is to bring His people together, not through bricks or towers, but through His everlasting kingdom. The Tower of Babel stands as a reminder. It whispers across history, pride divides, but God unites. Humanity fails, but God's plan never does. The Tower of Babel was more than an unfinished project in the plains of Shinar. It was a mirror, reflecting the human heart across generations. The people of that time sought unity, but not under God, they pursued it under ambition and pride. Their downfall revealed an eternal truth: human greatness without divine purpose cannot last. In today's world, the echoes of Babel are everywhere. Modern society builds new kinds of towers, monuments of technology, networks of influence, and systems of power. Humanity celebrates its progress in science, medicine, and communication. Planes soar above the clouds, satellites orbit the Earth, and rockets touch the stars. The Internet connects billions of voices into one global conversation. From the outside, it looks like the unity people once dreamed of at Shinar has finally come true. And yet, the same danger remains. Pride whispers in new ways: we can control life itself. We can create truth on our own terms. We can replace God with human wisdom. Wars break out, not only with weapons, but with words, ideologies, and digital battles. Nations rise and fall, not unlike the scattered tribes of old. Division still exists, only now it comes in the form of political unrest, cultural conflict, and moral confusion. The ruins of Babel remind us that progress without humility leads to collapse. A skyscraper can rise 1,000 feet, but if its foundation is weak, it cannot stand. In the same way, societies built on arrogance eventually crumble. The Tower of Babel was left unfinished, and history has shown that every empire built on pride eventually meets the same fate. Yet God's plan remains. Through the scattering of languages, He prepared the world for a greater unity, one not built on human achievement, but on His Spirit. The day of Pentecost showed that God can bridge every barrier of language, culture, and nation. And that promise still holds today. True unity does not come from towers of stone or digital platforms, it comes from humility, love, and faith in the One who created all. For the modern listener, the lesson is clear: pride isolates, but humility connects. The people of Babel wanted to make a name for themselves, but God calls us to honor His name. They sought to climb into the heavens, but God has already brought heaven down to earth through His Son. The tower collapsed, but His kingdom endures forever. So when we see the skyscrapers, satellites, and achievements of our time, we should remember the story of Babel. Technology and progress are not evil, but without God, they become empty monuments to human pride. With God, however, even the smallest acts of faith can build something greater than any tower, a legacy of love, truth, and eternal purpose. The ruins of Babel whisper across time: do not build without God. Do not seek glory apart from Him. For in His plan lies the only foundation that will never crumble.